the untold story of Frank Sinatra's smoldering grudge against Hollywood's rebel genius, a collision of ego, respect, and betrayal that shaped two legends forever. The phone rang in Frank Sinatra's Palm Springs compound on a scorching July afternoon in 1954. The voice on the other end belonged to Columbia Pictures head Harry Cohn, and the news hit Sinatra like a physical blow. "Frank, it's not happening. We're going with Brando." 3 years of campaigning for the role of his life, the part of Angelo Maggio in From Here to Eternity, had seemingly paid off. Contracts were being drawn. Sinatra had even taken a massive pay cut, slashing his usual fee to just $8,000. But now, Cohn was telling him Marlon Brando would take the role instead. Sinatra slammed down the receiver so hard it cracked the base. The man who would become known as the chairman of the board wasn't just disappointed, he was incandescent with rage. This wasn't merely about a movie role, this was about dignity, about resurrection, about survival. In the end, of course, history would unfold differently. Sinatra would get the Maggio role after all when Brando passed. He would win an Oscar for it, reviving a career that had been circling the drain. But that momentary betrayal, that split second when everything he'd worked for seemed to be handed to Marlon Brando, would spark a simmering hatred that would last decades. But to understand why Brando became Sinatra's most intensely despised rival, we need to rewind the tape. Back before the Oscars, before the Rat Pack, before the legends solidified into American mythology. Francis Albert Sinatra was born on December 12, 1915 in Hoboken, New Jersey, to Italian immigrants. From the beginning, his life was a battle. He weighed 13.5 pounds at birth, was delivered with forceps that scarred his face and eardrum, and grew up in a rough neighborhood where he learned to fight for respect. By his teens, Sinatra had already dropped out of high school and set his sights on becoming a singer, despite his mother's initial disapproval. His rise was meteoric. After winning a local talent contest with a singing group called the Hoboken Four, Sinatra caught the attention of bandleader Harry James in 1939 and then Tommy Dorsey in 1940. By 1942, he had broken out as a solo artist, causing mass hysteria among teenage girls at the Paramount Theater in New York. They called them Bobby Soxers, the young women who screamed, fainted, and ripped at their clothes when Sinatra performed. It was the first modern example of fan hysteria, predating Beatlemania by 2 decades. Sinatra's voice was revolutionary. Before him, male singers stood stiffly before big bands, shouting over the brass section. Sinatra brought intimacy, vulnerability, and conversational phrasing. He didn't just sing the notes, he lived the lyrics. "When I sing, I believe," he once said. "I'm honest." By 1946, Sinatra had sold over 10 million records. He had a weekly radio show. He was a movie star with an MGM contract. He was a liberal activist who spoke out against racial discrimination when it wasn't fashionable to do so, and he was married to his childhood sweetheart Nancy, with whom he had 3 children. The public Frank Sinatra was the American dream incarnate, the son of immigrants who became a cultural force through sheer talent and determination. But beneath the smooth-voiced crooner lurked complexities the public rarely glimpsed. Violent mood swings, a volcanic temper, a pathological need for control, and perhaps most significantly, an insecurity that never quite left him even at the height of his fame. Sinatra lived with the constant fear that it could all disappear in an instant. And in the late 1940s, it very nearly did. His voice began to falter, hemorrhaging from his vocal cords, threatening his career. His affair with Ava Gardner became public, destroying his family man image. His record sales plummeted. MGM dropped his contract. The press turned on him, calling him a communist sympathizer for his civil rights activism and a mob associate for his known connections to underworld figures. By 1952, Sinatra was performing in near-empty venues. The Bobby Soxers had grown up and moved on. This was the context of that phone call about From Here to Eternity. It wasn't just a role, it was salvation. Now, let's talk about the man who, for one brief moment, threatened to snatch that salvation away and who would become the focus of Sinatra's most enduring hatred. Who was Marlon Brando? What did he represent that so deeply threatened not just Sinatra's career but his entire sense of self? And why did the feud between these two titans of American entertainment remain so bitter for so long? Buckle up. We're about to enter the smoke-filled rooms where Hollywood power was brokered, where artistic revolutions were born, and where grudges were nurtured like fine wines, getting more potent with every passing year. The rivalry between Frank Sinatra and Marlon Brando wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a collision of eras, of artistic philosophies, of American masculinity itself. And at its core were wounds so deep they would never fully heal. Let's examine the full roster of Sinatra's most intense feuds and conflicts, the people who earned the legendary singer's most focused enmity. But keep your eye on the Brando connection. Because, as we'll discover, no one got under Sinatra's skin quite like the brooding method actor from Omaha. Their paths first significantly crossed in 1954, though they'd been aware of each other for years. Sinatra was struggling to rebuild his career, while Brando was the white-hot new star of Hollywood, having exploded into the cultural consciousness with A Streetcar Named Desire in 1951 and The Wild One in 1953. Their acting approaches couldn't have been more different. Sinatra was intuitive, natural, one take and done. Brando was methodical, introspective, demanding dozens of takes to explore psychological nuance. The first cut came during that brief period when Harry Cohn was considering Brando for the Maggio role in From Here to Eternity. Though Brando ultimately passed on the part, allowing Sinatra to claim it and win his Oscar, the mere suggestion that the younger actor was the preferred choice wounded Sinatra deeply. But the true breaking point came during the filming of Guys and Dolls in 1955. Sinatra, a natural singer with decades of vocal training, was cast as Nathan Detroit. Brando, who could barely carry a tune, was given the leading role of Sky Masterson with the film's best songs. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz reportedly made the decision because he felt Brando was the bigger box office draw. For Sinatra, it was an unforgivable insult to his musical legacy. On set, tensions exploded. Sinatra referred to Brando as Mumbles and refused to socialize with him. When Brando required multiple takes to get scenes right, his method acting approach in full force, Sinatra would loudly announce, "Are we going to do this scene until Marlon gets it right?" After one particularly grueling day of retakes, Sinatra reportedly snapped, "How many times do we have to do this goddamn scene? I got it on the first take." The antagonism ran deeper than professional friction. To Sinatra, Brando represented everything phony about the new generation of actors. He viewed method acting as pretentious intellectual garbage, a betrayal of the natural, authentic performance style Sinatra himself embodied. When asked about Brando's mumbling delivery, Sinatra reportedly said, "He's the most overrated actor in the world. It's just a lot of mumbo-jumbo." The hatred would simmer for decades, with neither man ever fully reconciling. In private, Sinatra would refer to Brando as that mental case and the world's most overrated actor. Before we continue with Sinatra's enemies, we must understand the wound that made him particularly vulnerable to Brando's perceived slights: his doomed relationship with Ava Gardner. They met in 1949 when Sinatra was still married to his first wife, Nancy. Gardner was Hollywood royalty, stunningly beautiful, fiercely independent, and sexually liberated in ways that both fascinated and terrified Sinatra. Their chemistry was instant and combustible. By 1951, Sinatra had divorced Nancy and married Gardner, but their relationship was a powder keg from the start. Their fights were legendary, public, violent, and fueled by jealousy on both sides. Sinatra's career was in freefall while Gardner's star was rising. The power imbalance tortured him. Together, they were dynamite, noted Gardner's biographer Lee Server. Separate, they were miserable. The breaking point came in 1953 when Gardner left Sinatra after discovering yet another infidelity. Though they wouldn't formally divorce until 1957, The separation devastated him. He attempted suicide twice, once by gas inhalation and once with a gun that misfired. When Gardner suffered a miscarriage during this period, Sinatra was inconsolable. It was the only child they would ever conceive together. The wounds from this relationship never healed. Even decades later, when both had married and divorced other partners, Sinatra kept a candle burning for Gardner. When she died in 1990, he refused to attend her funeral, telling friends, "The camera lenses would have focused on me, and it would have been her day." Gardner's relationship with Brando was yet another point of contention. Though they never had a confirmed romantic relationship, they worked together on Mogambo in 1953 and developed a close friendship that lasted for years, a connection that reportedly infuriated Sinatra. But remember that phone call? Sinatra's feud list was just getting started. Perhaps no betrayal cut deeper than the fracturing of Sinatra's relationship with Sammy Davis Jr., his Rat Pack brother and once close friend. Their bond began in the early 1950s, when Sinatra, to his credit, took a public stand against the racism Davis faced, refusing to perform in venues that wouldn't allow Davis to appear or stay. The breaking point came in 1960 when Davis married Swedish actress May Britt, an interracial relationship that was still controversial in America. Initially, Sinatra supported the couple, even standing as Davis's best man. But when John F. Kennedy's campaign team expressed concern about Sinatra's association with Davis during the 1960 presidential campaign, fearing backlash from Southern voters, Sinatra did the unthinkable. He uninvited Davis from a Kennedy inaugural gala that the entire Rat Pack was performing at. For Davis, it was a devastating betrayal from the man who had once been his fiercest defender. The relationship never fully recovered. Though they would continue to perform together, the trust was broken. Years later, Davis would say, "I love Frank, but there's always been something unspoken between us since then." The Davis situation showed a pattern in Sinatra's relationship with Brando as well. Initial respect followed by perceived betrayal, leading to a hardening of positions that made reconciliation impossible. Long before the famous iteration with Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., the original Rat Pack formed around Humphrey Bogart in the early 1950s. Sinatra was a junior member of this group, which gathered at Bogart and Lauren Bacall's home in Holmby Hills, Los Angeles. The conflict emerged in 1957 after Bogart's death from cancer. Sinatra, seeing an opportunity, essentially appropriated the Rat Pack concept, appointing himself leader of a new version. Many of Bogart's friends, including his widow Bacall, felt this was a tasteless power grab, disrespecting Bogart's legacy. When Bacall publicly criticized Sinatra for this move, the singer cut her off completely. The new Rat Pack became Sinatra's vehicle, with the original connection to Bogart gradually forgotten in popular culture. Exactly as Sinatra wanted. This pattern of appropriation and control would later inform Sinatra's rage when Brando began receiving accolades for musical performances in Guys and Dolls, territory Sinatra considered exclusively his own. In the 1950s, young Italian-American singer Vic Damone was widely hailed as having the best pipes in the business, a direct threat to Sinatra's musical supremacy. Initially, Sinatra was supportive of Damone, even helping him secure club dates. The relationship soured in 1955, when Damone signed with Capitol Records, Sinatra's label, and was given lavish promotional support. Sinatra, perceiving Damone as his replacement, reportedly called the younger singer and threatened, "I ought to break your legs." Though they would maintain a surface-level cordiality in public, Sinatra worked behind the scenes to limit Damone's opportunities. When Damone was scheduled to appear on a major TV special in 1960, Sinatra allegedly called the producer and said, "It's him or me," forcing Damone off the show. Sinatra's treatment of Damone mirrored his attitude toward Brando, intense hostility toward anyone who threatened his position as the definitive interpreter in his field, whether music or acting. Few fallings out were as complete as Sinatra's break with Peter Lawford, his Rat Pack colleague and brother-in-law to President John F. Kennedy. In the early 1960s, Sinatra was desperate to be part of the Kennedy inner circle, even renovating his Palm Springs home to accommodate a presidential visit. The betrayal came when Attorney General Robert Kennedy advised his brother to avoid staying at Sinatra's home due to the singer's alleged mob connections. Instead, JFK stayed at Bing Crosby's house, a Republican, during his California visit. It was Lawford who had to call Sinatra and deliver the news. Sinatra's response was nuclear. He took a sledgehammer to the helipad he'd built specially for the president's arrival. He banished Lawford from the Rat Pack and used his influence to have Lawford blackballed in Hollywood. When reporters asked about Lawford, Sinatra would reply, "Peter who?" 15 years later, Sinatra was still bitter. When Lawford died in 1984, Sinatra's only comment was reportedly, "I didn't even know he was sick." This scorched-earth approach to perceived betrayal would also characterize Sinatra's decades-long animosity toward Brando. By the early 1960s, Tony Bennett had emerged as a significant vocal talent, particularly after his Grammy-winning I Left My Heart in San Francisco in 1962. Unlike his treatment of Damone, Sinatra initially embraced Bennett, even calling him the best singer in the business in a 1965 Life magazine interview. Behind the scenes, however, tension simmered. Bennett represented a new generation that was moving beyond Sinatra's swing-era sound, incorporating elements of jazz and bossa nova. When Bennett's career exploded internationally, Sinatra reportedly became resentful of the attention the younger singer received. The final break came at a 1968 fundraiser where both men were performing. According to multiple accounts, Sinatra criticized Bennett's song selection backstage. Bennett stood his ground, responding, "You don't tell me what to sing." Sinatra, unaccustomed to being challenged, cut Bennett from his inner circle. What's fascinating is how this pattern mirrored the Sinatra-Brando dynamic, initial respect giving way to resentment as the younger artist carved out territory Sinatra considered his own. Perhaps the most public of Sinatra's feuds was his battle against the Godfather novel and film. When Mario Puzo's book was published in 1969, Sinatra immediately recognized similarities between himself and the character of Johnny Fontane, an Italian-American singer whose career is revived after his godfather pressures a movie producer by threatening him. For Sinatra, who had long fought rumors of mob connections, this was an unforgivable insult. In 1970, he confronted Puzo at Chasen's restaurant in Los Angeles, reportedly shouting, "Choke on it! Go ahead and choke on it," while jabbing his finger in the author's face. When Francis Ford Coppola began adapting the novel for film in 1971, Sinatra used his considerable influence to create obstacles for the production. According to several accounts, he pressured Frank Sinatra Jr. to turn down the role of Johnny Fontane and discouraged other singers from taking the part. The Godfather incident crystallized Sinatra's hatred for anyone who challenged his carefully constructed public image, something Brando had been doing for years through his dismissive comments about Sinatra's acting abilities. In 1983, comedian Tom Dreesen was opening for Sinatra on tour, a prestigious gig for any performer. During a show in Atlantic City, Dreesen made what he thought was a harmless joke about Sinatra's age, saying, "Frank's so old, his social security number is 2. The audience laughed. Sinatra did not. Backstage after the show, Sinatra exploded, telling Dreesen never to make jokes about his age again. Though Dreesen apologized and remained with the tour, their relationship was permanently damaged. Sinatra kept him at arm's length for the remaining dates, never again inviting him to private gatherings or meals. This hypersensitivity about aging particularly colored Sinatra's view of Brando in their later years. While Sinatra maintained a rigorous performance schedule into his 70s, Brando had largely retreated from public life, appearing in films sporadically and often looking dramatically different from his youthful heartthrob days. Sinatra allegedly took great satisfaction in Brando's physical decline, making cruel remarks about the actor's weight gain to mutual acquaintances. But remember that phone call about "from here to eternity"? Despite all these conflicts, no one ever quite occupied the same space in Sinatra's grudge roster as Marlon Brando. Now, let's add some crucial context to this list. Not all of Sinatra's relationships were defined by conflict. He maintained lifelong friendships with Dean Martin, despite occasional professional tensions. His respect for Ella Fitzgerald never wavered, and he reconciled with his first wife, Nancy, establishing a warm relationship that lasted until his death. There were even moments of potential thawing with Brando. In 1967, when Sinatra was directing the film The Naked Runner, he briefly considered casting Brando in the lead role, though the olive branch was quickly withdrawn when associates reminded him of their history. In 1972, both men found themselves at the same restaurant in Las Vegas. According to witnesses, they nodded acknowledgement from across the room but didn't speak, the closest they ever came to a public reconciliation. So why did Sinatra guard these grudges so fiercely? Why not let bygones be bygones, particularly as he achieved the elder statesman status that should have made him immune to petty rivalries? The answer lies in understanding how carefully Sinatra managed his public image. For a man born poor in Hoboken, who had experienced both dizzying success and devastating failure, control was everything. His entire post-1950s persona, the chairman of the board, the ring-a-ding-ding swagger, the my way or the highway attitude, was a fortress built to protect himself from ever experiencing the vulnerability of his early 50s career collapse. Grudges weren't just emotional for Sinatra, they were strategic. By defining himself against his enemies, he strengthened his own mythology. The Sinatra brand required villains as much as it needed allies, and no villain served this purpose better than Marlon Brando, whose entire approach to acting, fame, and masculinity represented a rejection of everything Sinatra stood for. Brando disdained the very celebrity that Sinatra cultivated. While Sinatra carefully maintained his public image, Brando gave rambling interviews and sent a Native American activist to reject his Oscar. While Sinatra performed in tuxedos, Brando wore torn T-shirts. While Sinatra's acting was intuitive and efficient, Brando's was intellectual and process-heavy. For the public, they represented competing visions of American manhood, Sinatra the tailored, controlled traditionalist, Brando the raw, unpredictable revolutionary. One ruled from within the system, the other sought to tear it down. Their mutual antipathy created a useful narrative tension that both men, consciously or not, exploited. When Brando was asked about Sinatra in interviews, he often dismissed him as a force of American entertainment, but not a serious actor, knowing such comments would infuriate the singer. Meanwhile, Sinatra would perform exaggerated, mocking impressions of Brando's mumbling delivery in his live shows, drawing raucous laughter from audiences primed to side with old blue eyes. The feud served them both, right up until it didn't.